Hello guys, now I explain you how to define the class in our environment. So you have to type class keyword, then the name of our class in capital letter. So when I build a car, I call a constructor. The constructor is defined by means of this method. This method is a predefined method, which is the init. So I initialize my object. So I build a car. In the initialization method, I have to define some attributes. So for example, I defined the color of my car with the keyword self. The self keyword is like this keyword in Java. So I define the value of an attribute that I want to bind to a particular object. Okay, so as attributes I defined the color and the motor power. The attributes can be defined also in the other methods. For example, you see that the acceleration time is defined in the accelerate method. Be careful that there is a difference between this and this, because this one is an attribute. This one is only a variable that is inside this method. So the scope of this variable is inside this method. And if I try to access it into another method, we will see what happens. So, for example, here I placed the tire numbers equal to the wheels number, and I placed wheels number equal to 4, rear mirrors equal to 2, but these are only variables, they are not attributes. Okay, so then I define the methods that I want that my class and my car will have. So accelerate method. To define the method, I have to place the def keyword, the name of the method, and the self in round brackets. So here I define, in this method, I define the acceleration time, which is equal to the inverse of the motor power. This is only a random formula, so only for let you understand the concept. So the more will be the power of the motor and less will be the acceleration time. So here I have the motor power by means of this parameter, because when I build my car I have to know what color the motor power, otherwise I cannot build it. So I define the acceleration time like this, and then I want to get the value of the acceleration time by calling this method. I suggest you that when you want to get some attribute, you use the get method, or when you want to set some parameters, you will use the set method, but this time we will use only the get acceleration time. So in order to build our car, we have to instantiate our object. Our object is instantiated in this way. We have to call the class name, passing the relevant parameters. The relevant parameters are the color and the motor power. So I instantiate my first car, and then, for example, I want to know my acceleration time. Okay, you see that there is an error, because the acceleration time is defined into the accelerate method, but no one has called the accelerate method because here I cancelled it. So my suggestion is to define all the attributes into the init method. So for example, I say that my default acceleration time is 4. Now you see that, oops, I comment out this. Okay, now you see that the acceleration time is equal to 4. So I memorized the acceleration time into the x variable and I printed it. Okay. Now, for example, I want to access this. I want to access this variable. And I try to access it through the print statement. So I call this method. So audcar object.accelerate, and I want to see whether this print is executed. Okay, here you see that acceleration time is not defined because this location is out of scope of this location, because this variable has its functions only in this part of code. In this part of code, the variable cannot be accessed. So, in order to get the value of this variable, we have to bind the variable to the object, so we have to define it as an attribute. And now, what you will see is that I cannot concatenate a float to a string, so we have to make the casting operation. So we have to transform the float into a string. And you see that now the acceleration time is 0.1 for this method and this method, because it's the same. So even if this variable has the same name like this, they are two different people, because this variable has this scope only in this part of the code. So this is very important to understand the scope of the variables. Okay, then for example, I defined the breaking time function, and I try now to access it. You see that an error is thrown because I defined my breaking time not like a method, but like a normal function. So it can be accessed only into the scope of the class. So for example, in order to set this attribute equal to 10 divided by self.motorPower, I cannot call the method of the object, but I have to call the function inside my class. Okay, then you see that when I call the breaking time function, I cannot place attributes because this is not a method, so I cannot place attributes. So for example, I can only do like this. So I can only define variables inside this scope. So let's try it. No, sorry, motor power. $100, for example. And now we can call the function without any errors. So now we can try to print the breaking time. We have to make the casting because it will be maybe a float number. So let's try what happens. You see that nothing happens because, okay, my class has performed this function call, but I didn't call this method because I cannot call it. So I can use this function only for making some internal computation, or for example to make some elaborations of my internal variables, but I cannot work with attributes inside the functions that are not methods. So I have to define the functions like a method, and then I can access on the attributes. So now when I call breaking time, this is self.breaking time, you see that this time the printing has been successfully. Okay, then as last concept, I want to show you how to access the attributes. So for example, I said you that it's better that I define get functions, but you can also for sure get your attributes by means of this statement. So for example, I want to print. Okay, I remove this. I want to print my acceleration time. I can print both by means of this statement and by means of this statement. Cancel this. Okay, this is 0.1. Then let's try instead to print the wheels number. You see that Audi car object does not have wheels number attribute, because here, as I said you, this is not an attribute, so you cannot access with the object.attribute, but this is simply a variable that can be used inside this scope. So, for example, I place the tires number equal to wheels numbers, and there is no error because the wheels number is inside the scope of the variable. Okay, guys, so you have to have clear the scope of the variables, what is an attribute, what a class is, how to instantiate an object in order to go ahead with our job. Okay, thank you very much and see you next time.